Welcome to International Photojournalism Today. Before we get started, I want to thank a couple of people who helped make this event possible. Primarily from the Overseas Press Club, Patty Krantz, thank you so much. One of the reasons that we're also here tonight is to mark the 75th anniversary of the Overseas Press Club. There's a photo exhibit in the hallway that our own Associate Professor Nina Berman curated and put together. A big thank you to Nina for all the work that she did. I hope you guys will take a gander at the lovely display of 2013 Overseas Press Club award winners in the hallway. Our participants and their Twitter handles are right here for you to comment on, and our hashtag CUJPhotog is there for any references. Before we get started, I wanted to ask Marcus Mabry, editor-at-large for the New York Times and president of the Overseas Press Club, to say a few words about the OPC.
Thank you so much, Abby. Thank you. Very briefly, thank you, Abby, too, and Columbia Journalism School for hosting us here. It is a great honor for the OPC in our 75th year to be here with such great friends, and also with some, we hope, some new friends and new members. The Overseas Press Club is a community of journalists, and we hope past, present, and future journalists. We exist in order to cultivate this profession. Never has it been, or I should say rarely, has our job been more dangerous, as some brutal events over the last few weeks have shown in graphic detail, and rarely has our job been more important in a globalized world, which is smaller and more interconnected than ever. So we exist to create a community, to engage in and promulgate best practices, especially by news organizations, large and small, who engage young people, often freelancers overseas, to make sure they're keeping them safe. And we also exist to convene the best in the field, to celebrate their excellence and to promulgate that excellence. And that's what we have before us tonight. So we are deeply honored by this panel. Each of you will find on your chair an application for the OPC. If you're a student, it costs $20 a year, which is a fantastic deal. If our profession is going to be strong and you're going to be safe and healthy and the best you can be, we have to all be in this together. So we hope all of you will join. So thanks.
Thank you, Marcus. And I'll also introduce myself. I'm Abi Wright, Executive Director of Prizes here at the Journalism School. So I'd like to introduce each of our panelists and thank them for joining us. And then I'm grateful that you guys have taken some time to think of some things to tell us about. Beginning with Mr. James Estrin from the New York Times. He's the New York Times Lens co-editor and senior staff photographer. Thank you for being here tonight. Sarah Voisin is with us. She's a staff photographer from the Washington Post since 1998. Her work on the war on drugs on Mexico has been widely recognized, including winning the John Faber Award for the Overseas Press Club. She's also the co-founder and co-director of the Women Photojournalists of Washington, which I look forward to hearing more about, I hope. And Bob Nickelsberg, who first went to Afghanistan in 1988 on assignment for Time magazine to cover the Soviet occupation and has returned regularly ever since. He was a Time contract photographer for 25 years and is here because his book, Afghanistan, A Distant War, received the 2013 Olivier Rebbot Award from the OPC. In writing, your book came out, when your book came out, Dexter Filkins wrote about it in The New Yorker. Nickelsberg has documented each period with searching eyes and a fearless comportment, capturing the novel and the surreal in a war that never ends. So thank you all for being here. And Bob, why don't we start with you? Some of the pictures spanning many years are in the hallway. Tell us about your experiences covering the war in Afghanistan or Afghanistan.
Thank you, Abby. I was based overseas for 25 years. I decided to actually plunk down and put an anchor out wherever I was photographing for a number of years, and that includes 12 years in India, which began in 1987, 1988. South Asia, which is where the Time Bureau covers for South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and occasionally Bhutan and Afghanistan. So it was less schizophrenic to fly in for 2-3 weeks to work with the Mujahideen or whichever part of India you had a passion for. I decided to live and go about my day-to-day existence covering as a photojournalist. Getting visas part of the time was a big priority, and in 1988, the Soviets finally granted visas to allow journalists into Kabul. And prior to that, you had to go in with the Mujahideen across the border, which I found to be rather limiting, and also I hadn't been doing it as long as other photographers had, which is close to 10 years. So once Kabul opened up, it became the destination, and you had a foreign ministry minder at all times, also probably a spy. So you had to have that awareness about who was working with you. You didn't really have a chance to roam around much, but as the Mujahideen got closer and closer to Kabul in 1992, this man in particular, Ahmad Shah Massoud, there is a picture in there earlier on, that one there. This is April of 1992 when he's talking to the media. Afghanistan is made up of ethnic groups. It's really not one whole country. And here, this is one of the finest examples of the ethnic groups minus the Pashtuns, because the CIA and Pakistan's ISI was actively involved in not supporting these particular Mujahideen leaders. On the left, you have the Ismaili. Next to him, you have an Uzbek, and then another Ismaili, and then a Tajik. You can see the different faces, different beards. So when you move into a region like this, and that was my responsibility, was to pick up quickly on who you're facing every day. And it's a kaleidoscope, but you need to get it right. You have Shia and Sunni here, and on the second person on the left had just defected from the government, Minister of Defense Rashid Dostum, and you probably are aware that once the Minister of Defense resigns and goes to the opposition, that's pretty much it. So Ahmad Shah Massoud in 1992 is telling the journalists which intersections he's going to attack, which ministries they're all going to break off on. And then 2 weeks later, well, that's a picture of the Taliban, but 2 weeks later, for sure, okay, so the reason I brought up Massoud is that this is a picture of him in May of 2001. The Taliban had kicked him out. And in May, I made my way up with Anthony Davis, a Persian-speaking journalist, and he knew something was up in Kandahar in 2001. So this is 4 months away from 9/11. And interestingly enough, in that house behind him on September 9th of 2001, two Arab journalists, two Arab al-Qaeda members posing as journalists, assassinated him with one camera was packed full of C4 explosives, similar to the two cameras that are behind you. That's just the way they set up the interview, and as soon as they mic'd him up on September 9th, it blew up. And Taliban and al-Qaeda had 100% control of Afghanistan, and had 9/11 been thwarted, actually Taliban and al-Qaeda would have had full possession of Afghanistan, and it's doubtful the United States would have done anything about it. So this is their attempt to take over territory, which is now what's going on in Syria and Iraq, failed in Afghanistan. We kicked them out. In October, the air war started of 2001. But now you can see, and certainly as journalists, it's a factor, a difficulty factor so far ahead of what it was like to work in that particular period. Yes, I did get through Taliban and al-Qaeda lines through contacts and luck, but today you know what happens when you go into Syria and Iraq and luck is not with you. So another reason for bringing up these particular pictures is if you do cover a story for any length of time and maintain contact with leaders, it's a good idea to go in and say hello and take, particularly as a photographer, to have pictures of this person whenever possible. You never know in developing countries, and particularly with the level of violence in Afghanistan, if they're going to be alive much longer. And 4 months later, he passed. So I think that's
Can you
We
just
should
tell
move-
us a little bit about fixers, or when you're traveling in areas where you don't speak the languages or you might not know safety conditions farther down the road, how you've handled that over the years?
The fixers, translators, drivers, that category it comes under logistics, and working overseas, it's 51% logistics and 49%, if you want to break it down that way. It is so important to have a driver you can trust, and you don't know, you're actually establishing trust with a new driver. He's wondering if you're going to get him or her killed. Can he rely on you? Will you pay him? Will you tip him? But they are basically your eyes and ears and your navigator of a new terrain, a new environment. They're the cat's whiskers of any trip. They're so terribly important. But at the same time, you have to take care and not inform too much to a driver that they become vulnerable if they're stopped at security. After they drop you off, they're pressured, they're extorted for information you don't know, but so at the same time, you're trying to establish yourself with a new driver and how fast their reaction time is, and whether they disappear and go for lunch when you ask them to actually to be here, how you go about finding a new driver. But actually, in one way, for photographers anyway, is I don't need 100% fluency for English. Reporters do. So it becomes an extra person in the car, and generally I go by myself with the driver and try to see different parts of the city quickly and know where to navigate, know when rush hours. You have to rely on them to tell you all these logistical challenges.
And in terms of being on your own, though, are you would be in touch with someone back in the U.S., or in terms of your safety and your whereabouts, was there always someone who knew where you were?
One of the beauties of Afghanistan from 1988 to probably 1999 was they couldn't find you. Telex machines, there were no sat phones, or I think sat phones may have worked only in a few locations, but basically you could unplug and work. Obviously, you had to re-engage with New York and tell them, I sent all my film back to New York, so it took at least 24 hours to get film, and I never saw film. So until the digital era, working and living in India, you spend most of your time smuggling in equipment, smuggling in film. It was very awkward to be next to somebody, say, who had lived in Hong Kong, who had the latest equipment. In India, I had to struggle just to get a new phone. But film you needed pigeons, you needed letters of non-objection, you needed friends. And I remember one roll of film from the International Red Cross, head of the Afghan ICRC in Kabul. A Swiss gentleman refused to take one roll of Kodachrome for me out from Kabul to Islamabad. It was like a 45-minute flight. They couldn't do it. And if you wonder why MSF all of a sudden became very popular with journalists, it was for
transport.
Things like that. They said, no, it's policy. We can't take your pictures. We can't take a notebook. We can't take anything from you. And after the first Gulf War, they realized that all the journalists and photographers and news people were going to work with MSF, and bingo. It just gives you an idea of how much logistics is important, and your personal contacts with people is crucial.
Great, thank you. Sarah, you had mentioned earlier about how much time you've spent studying Latino issues as well as the Spanish language, and how that's informed your reporting in Mexico and other Latin American countries. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Thanks for coming tonight. Is this working? I've dedicated my career to documenting Latin America, immigration, the war on drugs, everyday life, and Latinos working in the U.S. More than 20 years ago, I fell in love with this culture and the people while working in El Salvador. I did an internship there where I lived there for about a year when I was probably about your age. While I cover all types of assignments, this is the theme that really inspires me. So now we're going to see some photos. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about each photo as they come up. It's the red photo.
Here you go.
That one, yep. Mexico is home to the hemisphere's largest, most sophisticated, and violent organized criminal gangs. Next photo. Assassinations, mutilations, and other terror tactics are part of a daily life. In Tijuana, this executed body was left naked with an intimidation letter attached. The Mexican military searches cars coming in from the United States. Many of the weapons used in violent crimes in Mexico were actually purchased in the United States. Next. Children look up to the cartel with their big fancy trucks and their weapons. In Ciudad Juarez, a boy points a toy gun at a Border Patrol truck parked right on the other side of the fence in New Mexico. The wave of killings, kidnappings, and savage intimidation has left the general public terrorized and desensitized to the nonstop violence. This body was in Mexico City. In Juarez, this woman flagged down the police passing her house. She was worried about her husband, who didn't come home the night before. When she described him, they showed her an execution photo on the front page of the local paper that matched his description. In the remote mountains of Sinaloa, a Mexican Marine storms through a field of marijuana, which they destroyed shortly after in a gigantic bonfire. In Tepito, a notoriously rough neighborhood in Mexico City known for drug-related crimes, residents smoke marijuana and inhale solvents on a playground. Santa Muerte is a religious cult closely linked to crimes and drugs. Mexican officials have found many shrines in the mansions of prominent drug lords. On the first day of each month, worshipers in Tepito come out in the hundreds to pray. At the same time that drugs are being smuggled through Latin America into the U.S., immigrants such as this Honduran man are hopeful of a new life on the other side of the border. In Arriago, Mexico, 150 miles north of the Guatemalan border, immigrants hop a train for the perilous journey 1,500 miles north to the U.S. As we've seen in recent news, many children make the journey without their parents. They are often left behind by human smugglers. At a detention center in Tapachula, Mexico, a 9-year-old girl who is trying to reach her mother in the U.S. sits nervous and scared. It's heartbreaking, actually. Many of these immigrants are trying to escape the violence and extreme poverty of their country. Prostitutes dance with off-duty federal policemen at a bar in Ciudad Juarez. An impoverished girl stands in her backyard near the U.S. border. Many of the immigrants never complete their journey. This young Salvadoran girl was caught by Border Patrol in Texas. Others die trying to get to the U.S. Or they make a life in the U.S. for a while and are later deported. A young man is shackled in Virginia before being loaded on an ICE deportation flight. As Congress struggles to pass immigration reform, President Obama has deported more than 2 million immigrants. Many of these young people are returning back to their countries and being murdered or participate in organized crime. This young man was killed 2 doors from his home. Minutes after his body was removed by the morgue workers, his uncle cleans the bloodstains from the sidewalk. Another father is executed. Throughout the years, the violence, corruption, and poverty continue. People are scared for their lives and for the lives of their children. Many are hopeful that they can make a new home in the U.S., but sometimes it's just a dream. Basically, in your reporting, I'd like to encourage you to find a focus. Find something that interests you and motivates you, something that you can keep coming back to throughout the years in between your other assignments.
Sarah, these pictures are incredible. How did you get access to all of these places? The detention centers, the ride along with the cops?
I mean, every situation, these photos represent many years and many multiple trips. Every situation is completely different.
Did your language skills help you, or local contacts, or?
Absolutely. Language, I feel like, first of all, language does not come easy to me at all. I've worked so hard to speak Spanish. I've even gone to Guatemala and lived there for a summer, and I've taken so many classes, but I definitely learned the language best. I know street Spanish really well. So I communicate without a translator, and it really helps because you can pick up subtleties. You can, knowing the culture really helps, but also knowing the language, you can overhear things. Some things your translator might not seem are important. You can pick up on really important things, know where to be, and
So, some really grisly images. Covering this kind of beat, how do you sustain yourself over the years, going back time and again to this kind of violence? You talk about the desensitizing of the audience, but what about for yourself?
I have two things to say about that. One is the Latino culture. It's such a warm. This is why I fell in love with this topic. I don't come. My family's not Latino. I don't. When I grew up in St. Louis, and I didn't have any Latino friends or anything like that. But with doing my internship there, as a young person, the culture is so warm, and family's so important to them, and even throughout these horrible situations, that really strikes me as an important thing. And so you get strength from seeing these people. I go there for a couple of weeks or a month and then go home and then take another trip, but these people are living it, yet they're still happy. A lot of them are happy, some of them are happy. And there's children still playing on the streets, and they're moving on. So that's one thing. And just connecting with these people, the fact that they're allowing you into their lives it makes me, that it certainly gives me a reason to come back, and it's a really important thing that they're allowing me to do.
Absolutely.
But also, the other part of that is I think it's important to have a good network of, I have a lot of really great friends, and mostly photojournalists, but we have a really great community of photographers and friends, and talking about your images and talking about what you've seen, and going out and having fun when you get back. It doesn't hurt. And you were mentioning WPAW, or Women Photojournalists of Washington, WPAW. We have that's another really a great organization and a support system for photographers, especially there's everyone from retired 75-year-old photographers to a lot of Corcoran photojournalism students in Washington, D.C. We have 200 members, but we have a lot of gatherings and things like that are very supportive, so that was really beneficial.
What would you say to a student interested in covering Mexico in general, or immigration issues, in practical terms, advice?
I'd say find a good fixer for sure. It's definitely dangerous there right now. I do know friends who are working down there very recently. A woman actually, who's shooting 4x5, but she's definitely doing documentary 4x5, and she's working alone. But I find that pretty scary. And I started this project working alone, doing a lot of street photography, and one time I didn't have a fixer with me. I had a really scary situation, and it was a funeral. The family welcomed me in, and I was spending the whole day with them. We were at a vigil in the morning, and then we went to the church, and then we were at the burial site, which I knew that was going to be the most visual situation. And the family, they were welcoming. However, it was the burial of two brothers who were the young foot soldiers of the cartel, so they weren't exactly really great upstanding citizens. So they had a lot of friends the friends gathering throughout the day, seeing me take some photographs, really objected. And at the burial site where I went to all by myself on their bus, which was an hour outside of the city, and they were getting really angry at me and wanted me to leave, and I had no way to leave, and that was so definitely my number one recommendation is you need a second set of eyes and your own transportation. I ended up leaving with the hearse driver. I begged him to take me away in this green 1960s hearse. The guy was so sweet, but we got a mile down the road, and these guys were so angry. They're young gang members. 4 of them are chasing us in an SUV, and they pulled up behind us, made us pull over, and all 4 of them get out and come around the side of the car, and it was very scary. But the hearse driver, who didn't know me at all, so this could have gone completely the opposite way, he was just really great. He was like, I don't know her, I'll keep her back in my office, and he managed to really de-escalate the situation, and I went back and left immediately. So yeah, make sure you have a really great fixer, and you can often find someone from asking colleagues who've been there before you, or the local newspaper is a good source to find someone good to work at. Facebook, I'm sure a lot of you have, you can always post on Facebook for recommendations.
I'd be careful about that. That's how Sotloff
Oh, yeah,
is
you're right.
missing.
I don't know that story. What's that story?
Go ahead.
The second journalist who was recently beheaded was on the border of Turkey and Syria and posted on Facebook that he was about to come across and looking for a translator and perhaps some help on the other side. And maybe 2.5, 3 years ago, you could do that and find a reliable person on. But this did not. It's part of the extenuating circumstances about his being nabbed, but they were waiting for him.
Yeah, maybe you can message someone on Facebook who you know has worked there, private message them.
Wow, there is contribution. Thank you so much. Jim, in 2008, you launched the Lens blog at the Times, which has since become the go-to site for photojournalists and anyone interested in photography. Why did you decide to start this blog, and what has the impact been?
When we first started thinking of it, which was 2008, there was the world of photojournalism was in flux. There was, it wasn't clear what was happening. It was clear there were bad things happening for photographers, that the economic model was changing. But now the things that we realize today, I don't think were clear then. And so I felt there was a need for some kind of action. I thought it was used that they needed to promote photography and photographers and potentially be able to help the conversation and analyze what was going on and what are the best ways to respond. And it's interesting in that, so originally Lens was a response to the set of circumstances in 2008 in photography, which is before Instagram, which is before social media was as large as it is now. Of course it existed, but it wasn't as large. So it was a different time. But as far as the impact, I think that one impact is every publication that exists does essentially what we did, which is publish photographers' projects. And most of them also will write about a photographer as well. So that's good. And even, which we didn't in the beginning, now there's even a minor market in this, which is photographers get paid. Not enough money, but they get paid, which originally they weren't getting paid on the web. I think in individual circumstances, I think I could probably make a list of at least 100 photographers whose lives were changed by being on Lens, by their work being promoted. We particularly are interested in issues of representation and who's telling stories, and so we're particularly looking for photographers who are outside of the United States and Europe. I think there's certain issues we focused on, and we have had some effect as far as conversation. I mean, it's really more for other people to judge than me, the effect we had. I know we had the pleasure of publishing Robert's photographs.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of, I was emailing you earlier about those Beslan anniversary photographs I found to be incredibly powerful. I encourage you guys to look at those. But you've also started a lot of substantive conversations going, including the young women who were raped and hung in India, the discussion about how graphic those images were, and having Stephanie Sinclair comment on it. I think it's just a great convening spot as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you for being with us. I encourage all of you to look at the Lens blog, and maybe even you may appear in the Lens blog.
Yes, absolutely. We look at everything.
This is
I was wondering if I could mention in reaction, you had asked before about what I look for in photographs, and looking at these photographs are the sort of the two things I look for. So the first thing I look for in photographs are photographs that make me feel something, anything. I want to be moved, and that's something which I think I saw as, a great deal in your work, in Latin America. It was just really powerful. Mostly that's a result of, besides talent and a talent at doing that, but it's a result of time spent and passion. And so that's sort of the first thing I look for. And the other thing I look for is accuracy. And I was thinking in Robert's photographs, his deep and profound knowledge of the subject matter. So if I look for photographs, I'm not only looking for the photograph, I'm looking actually for the photographer. Because to get accuracy, to know what the image is, it's actually get that from the photographer, not from the image independent of the photographer.
That's great. We were speaking earlier as well about Tyler Hicks, who unfortunately couldn't be with us, and his award-winning photographs of the massacre at the Westgate Mall in Nairobi, Kenya. Can you tell us about how he happened to be there, or
Sure.
the story behind these pictures? I think we have some we
Yeah.
can show you guys.
So Tyler, actually, he won the Pulitzer for this. He lives in Nairobi. That's where he's stationed. And he was, by coincidence, maybe a half mile away when this happened. He was actually picking up photographs that had been framed, that he was given as a present for his wedding. He had just been married. And so, in a sense, it was by accident that he was nearby. But it wasn't really an accident, the photographs that he took. His ability to find his way in and to know how to operate safely in that environment was a result of 20 years of experience doing that, and of tremendous thought and preparation when he does that. So he got into this and took extraordinary photographs. He was in touch. He got to the site and he called, once he realized what was happening, he actually called the foreign photo editor of the New York Times, David First. I think it was before sunrise in New York. And they talked about it. He was in touch from the beginning. And then, as soon as he was out, he was in touch again. And so the Times was prepared. And as a matter of fact, I think it was David, I'm not sure, but someone talked to me about it too. And so I was able to, after he got out and filed, he was inside, I think, for a couple of hours, while the terrorists were still in there. But after he got out and filed, I was able to interview him. And I talked to him that afternoon, and we published an interview with him that afternoon. It's the ability to do that is really a result of his carefulness in preparation, and he's so methodical in the way he photographs, in the way he thinks about issues of safety and how to move around. And that's what I think you learn over the long period of time. I mean, Robert can speak to that, but when you first come out, you don't necessarily know this, so you lean on people who are more experienced. What else would you like to know?
Oh, I mean, he has a knack for being in the right place at the right time, especially this year, my God.
He's brilliant conflict photographer, one of the best.
But yeah, I mean, I was just going to ask you to elaborate a little more about what it is about his work in particular what's distinctive about it, aside from the location.
For me, I mean, they would be great just for the fact of him being in these places, in the right places, and having images that report what's really happening from the inside, from the front lines. But in addition, he has an extraordinary eye, and the images are usually working on all sorts of levels, not just in a news level, but on an aesthetic level as well, and it heightens your experience with the images. That's actually what I'm most in awe of about his work. I mean, I have deep and profound respect for his doing it and his ability to maneuver. What I have trouble getting my head around is that he's able to do it and make really amazing photographs at the same time.
Absolutely. We're going to open up for questions soon, but before we do, I'd like to ask each of you to talk a little bit about digital technology. Are you on Instagram? Are all of you, or any of you on Instagram, or talk about?
Occasionally, I'm not, it's not the first thing I do in the morning, but I find it fascinating.
Frankly, I want to know what you eat for breakfast, so I wish you'd start posting.
That was my follow-up
That's often on
question.
people's Instagram account, isn't it? Yes.
The food, yeah.
I do think it's relevant, and particularly now that you make $1.17, you know, for an image that's sold through Getty. I mean, why not just put it out there anyway? But in any case, it does certainly put you in touch with your audience, and it gets you involved quickly with images, and in this very democratic way of supporting the profession. And it does help look at other people's opening images of the day or their closing ones, but technology is by far, as much as logistics is in foreign reporting, so important. And whether you overload yourself with it, there are gearheads who, John Stanmeyer from the National Geographic, a photographer who goes on long trips, can tell you algorithms from, I mean, my God, you know, I don't know if you really need to know all of that, but it's certainly, it's a good way to stay abreast of where to put your next hard-won and earned $2,000 or something like that for new gear. Yes, it's important. As a freelancer, Sarah, I think you as a staff person may have, and Jim too, I own my own equipment, but so you have to be very specific and targeted to what you carry, and the redundancy factor and extra batteries and cables as well. But and maybe in Mexico, Sarah, you've been able to find things at the last minute, but some of these outer regions I've gone to, you're cooked if the power cable, all of a sudden, the voltage goes up to 240 degrees, and you smell smoke, and that's not good smoke that you're smelling. But so yes, that in a sense, you need double of everything too.
Yep, that's true. Well, as a staff member, I do Instagram, but I Instagram under the Washington Post account most often. Some of us were Instagramming on our own accounts, and it's hard to like sign in, sign out. Like, I hate to like Instagram a photo of my breakfast cereal for the Washington Post, so I kind of remain in Washington Post signed in on Instagram, and. I think like some of this new digital technology, I mean, it's no secret, who knows where the newspaper industry is going. But I mean, the Washington Post lately is doing a lot of hiring, and it's the younger people with like all the digital technology and video technology. So I mean, I definitely think making yourself a well-rounded, you know, videographer, in addition, a videographer, social media expert, and storytelling still photographer is would be good to do.
Have you been trained to shoot video? What is your feeling about still photographers shooting video?
We have a video team at the Washington Post. However, I mean, back in the day, I've been at the Post 16 years now. So back years ago, we were doing like audio, like using audio equipment and collecting audio on our assignments, and so I was really into that, and I thought it was pretty fun. I could see myself at NPR doing that. That'd be in another lifetime I'll do that. So we have a team of videographers we've never been asked to do video until this year. So now we've all had video training. They brought Nikon in and we did a week of training at the Post, all the staffers, and we're getting an extra camera body to be a video camera, and we have all the mics and everything like that. But I think I think you can do as much as you want, but as I said, I mean, who knows where the industry is going? I think it would be an asset to myself to be well-trained in this. So, I mean, I intend to do it, and I think it's something we all need to do now. But I haven't done it yet.
I'm a big fan of Instagram. I think it's particularly useful if you're a freelance photographer. I actually know photographers who get work and make money from Instagram. I know people whose careers even have been made on Instagram. I'm thinking of Ruddy Roy, who couldn't get any assignment at all before he did that. So I like Instagram. As far as video, I found, most of my career at the Times, I've been there, including the time I freelanced, was 26 years. And it's changed continually. First we were shooting black and white, then color. But it was basically the same thing and something which I knew how to do. But then we started shooting digital photography and something else to master mostly with positive effects. But then when we had audio and video, and slideshows in the early 2000s, I found it tremendously liberating. Because the problem I had as a newspaper photographer, even in a longer project of 2 weeks or 3 weeks, was I wasn't the storyteller. I wasn't the author. It's actually why I started writing, is because even if it was my story idea, and I spent 3 months on and off, and the writers spent a week, I wasn't the storyteller. And I want to be the storyteller. So video and audio was liberating. Writing was profoundly liberating. And I think all of these changes made for, if I was still shooting black and white, I mean, I love being a photographer. It would be great. It would be fun. But I just think of how much poorer my life would be. Just ultimately slightly just less interesting. So I'm a big fan of, today I was playing with a loaner of the 6 Plus, the iPhone, which is an amazing camera, just stunningly fabulous camera. So I'm for all of it. With one caveat, you have to think and see.
Think and see before posting, or think and see?
No, I'm taking a picture. You can take pictures. The one drawback of digital, what I was thinking about, is the speed. It's the great advantage, as in news, the speed is fabulous. But, we can shoot 5,000 photos in a day. The advantage of film or medium format or large format is you got to think about each one. Even film, you're not going to shoot more than 8 rolls. And today, if you're covering an event, a news event, not an intimate story, you're going to shoot much more than that.
So interesting. Please, I invite you to the microphone. Ask our panel your questions. It's so interesting. I read somewhere that the number of photographs taken every year, you would know the statistic maybe, like the number in the last 6 months is more than every picture ever taken since the beginning of the camera or something?
I think it's
just
approaching,
the volume?
it probably will hit 1 trillion photos this
trillion.
year, taken in the year. It was, or if not, it'll be next year or the year after. It's well over 500 million. There's a lot of arguments on it, but I mean, when I say 500 million, I mean 500 billion. It's well over 500 billion photographs.
Okay.
So which is more than you could conceive of. Soon it'll be more than there are atoms in the universe.
Particularly for Sarah, but I would like all of you to answer it if you can. When you see or come upon these scenes that are extremely horrific and just graphic and violent, the more you do it, does it ever feel like you become numb to it?
No. I'm never numb to it. And in fact, like at every funeral I've ever covered, I've cried. Like, I see their pain, and you know, you're not numb. I'm not numb to it, but you do have to kind of step back from that a little bit so that you can think about where the lights come. I mean, you have watch what people are doing, wait for your moments, think about how the light's hitting it. I mean, there's a lot of different aspects you have to put together to make a good photograph. The number one, in my opinion, is the moment. And so waiting for that, sometimes you have to wait for a long time. Maybe, you know, that murder where the uncle is sweeping up the bloodstained sidewalk, I mean, I was there forever. I mean, not that there was, I don't even know if there was another photographer there, but, because it was in the middle of the night, like 3 a.m. or 4 a.m., but that photo to me is really telling, you know, just the family member wanting it to go away as quick as possible, but that is waiting around for the moment.
Part of the challenge of taking an acceptable picture is you have to find it. I mean, you just can't be there and stare and not do anything. You also have the camera in between you and the scene. You try to work with that as sort of not a barricade, but sort of you have a purpose for being there. You're not part of the family. You're not part of the investigation team or what. You're separate, and there's a beginning, a middle, and an end to a funeral. And the more you go, and certainly in Latin America, where I worked in El Salvador, when the death squads, every morning we went out looking for bodies. I mean, and that's a little bit trickier than this, where you come across a violent situation. But to literally go almost picking like for metal and glass at a garbage dump for bodies, you start to wonder really what you're doing sometimes. But you do have to make it interesting. You have to find out a little bit more about the person, perhaps emote somehow, go along with the crowd. And in some cultures, crying is obviously permitted and supported, but in some are quiet. So you need to sort of maintain that kind of parallel universe with the emotion. It's a very emotional situation, and you do try to keep a tight grip on not just your stomach and heart, but you have to keep moving and tell the story. You may not have ever known the person before while they were alive, so the narrative becomes essential, not just the funeral and the gore.
Hello, my name is Millie. I'm actually an undergraduate at Columbia, and every time I come to one of these conferences and see amazing journalists or photojournalists like you, it really makes me and I think other people want to go into the profession. But I'm really wondering, what do you think makes a good relationship between an editor and a photographer? And maybe for those of you who are more photographers, how do you feel like the editing process has made you blossom as a photographer or get better?
I think from both sides of that relationship, I think it's really important. It's a problem today because you're less likely to have an editing relationship, because you're less likely to have a full-time job. And, you know, we probably all were influenced by, obviously, photographers, but also, if you were lucky, editors when we were young. And, you know, there's too many young photographers I know who work in a vacuum, or they work with their friends who are photographers, and a very good editor can add a great deal. And I always, as a photographer, actually seek out. I want to work with an editor. It's a weird thing to be an editor, not so much on lens, but just an editorial editor, because you don't actually get your name under the photograph. I always thought, I never quite understood why someone would become an editor, a photo editor, if they were a photographer. It made no sense. First off, it's so much more fun to be a photographer. And also I've never seen a photo editor's name under a photograph. You don't pick up the paper in the front, in the front lawn. There's like no credit. But there's this great obligation, and actually, David First, that relationship that he has with Tyler of keeping his photographers safe, of when they are injured, as happened with Joao, of being right on top of it. There's a tremendous obligation, there should be, for an editor to help a photographer do their work, understand the work, help them do it.
A lot of it's for guidance, and the images that you funnel up, whether transmit or hand deliver a disc, but particularly from overseas, you lose track of where you were yesterday or 2 days ago, even though you have notes and a good idea of a hour by hour or part of the day by incident, for instance. How it all gets stitched together as a story. Again, the narrative on the beginning, a middle, and an end, you need some guidance for that. It's not like video or a movie where something can be shot 3 days ago and then that's used later on, and but it does have to follow some kind of rational timeline for a moment of that editing process. And also just to hear somebody away from a conflict zone, for instance, or someone who cheers you up and makes, checks out your vocal temperature, your verbal temperature on how you're doing. Very, very important.
Yeah, and when you're working on a project, like the drug cartel portion of the story, it was like several weeks in, and then I would come out and, a month in and come back. I had a great editor that I was working with at the time, and it really helps to have that, to step back and have another person who, we could really, here's what you have, here's what is missing, and how, for the cartel story, it was emotion that was really hard to get. There was a lot of blood and gore, but getting acts, people are scared to have their photo taken during that story, so it was really hard to get faces and people and emotion and feeling in there. And I have a bunch of photos that I didn't show that, I got some of that stuff at funerals or at people's houses after they've lost someone, but having that awareness of what's missing definitely came from working with an editor.
So Sarah, I know you talked about the importance of connecting with the subject as the photographer and how you found it easy to connect with many of the families in the Latin American culture, but my question for all three of you is, how do you connect with a subject who's more difficult to crack, especially in their really vulnerable and painful moments?
I think time. First thing for me, it's you need to be authentically yourself. It's who you are. And it being sincere, listening, being present makes a really big difference, because people can know when will know otherwise. It just doesn't come across. But it's time, sincerity, empathy, listening, and if you do those things right over a period of time, you can crack anything, absolutely anything, I think. I think anything's photographable. Some just may take much longer to make the relationship.
I think you're a little optimistic, but
I photographed an assisted suicide in Oregon. It took me 6 years, and to be able to be present at the assisted suicide, I think that I think it's doable. I look at Donna Ferrado's work.
yeah. I was thinking more about like a subject who says, I don't want to be photographed, that some of those you can't crack.
No.
But exactly what you were saying, I spent the last 2 days working on a magazine piece for the Washington Post magazine on, not yesterday, but the day before, I went there with the reporter. The subject had already told her she doesn't want to be photographed. She has a little kid. She didn't want the kid to be photographed. And I never want to publish a photo of someone who's not comfortable with it. However, I will go to the person and say, this is why I think it's important. So I didn't even bring my camera in there with her. The day was for me just to go and meet this woman. And I just explained to her, that her story is important and she may help someone else who is suffering through the same thing. And while words and stories are wonderful, a photo says 1,000 words. Or, I mean, the photo, seeing someone and seeing what their life is like is really going to draw them into the story, and the readership is going to be better because of that photograph. So I just left, and a lot of times, maybe if you get an inkling that your subject might be comfortable with one type of photography over another, maybe there's a subject who wants to, have, lights and makeup on, and I wouldn't be sending me to that story, but with her, I told her, I just want to be there like a fly on the wall. I want you to not dress special, and I just explained to her like what my ideal world would be. Like I would just come in here and hang out with you guys, I don't need to stick a camera in your face and put big lights up. I just want to hang out with you. And much to my shock, she was like, oh yeah, that sounds cool. And then as it turns out, so she's like, she even let me start that same day, and I spent yesterday with her, and I think she feels honored even, you never know, like they say they don't want, somebody might say they don't want photographs, but I think this woman actually feels honored that we're taking so much time to spend with her. And so, but yeah, be yourself and be honest. Let them get to know you.
I've worked a lot in Islamic neighborhoods and countries where photography is very difficult, at least for 50% of the population, namely the women. And I've gone into parts of Brooklyn, walking around with a camera, not with any intention of taking a picture, just so that people see that I'm there. And that's been a lot of that time has been spent just getting the neighborhood acquainted with me, if I can. At least shop owners, for instance, yes, he's okay, don't worry about it. He's not the police, because the NYPD has spent a lot of energy and time trying to infiltrate and investigate the Muslim neighborhoods in this country. That here comes a white guy with a camera and a haircut. I duck NYPD all the time. I'm not a cop. You have to prove that. Let's put it that way. Rather than greet everybody, you come across and say, "Hi, I'm a photographer. I'm going to be here for 3 hours," and they go, "Oh my God." So you do have to be a people person and meet the elder, for instance, quickly. And if the elder says fine, in any culture, meet the person with the highest rank, male or female, you're in. But that you need to do that very quickly. Coming in the door, quickly size up who is at the top of the food chain, for instance, and you've only got 2 minutes, 3 minutes, maybe 10. And if you don't do that, somebody will try to get you out or cut you off. So you'll see how valuable time is and how valuable your interchanges with people are.
We're almost out of time, so maybe both of you can ask your questions, and then we'll let our panelists answer.
Okay, it's primarily for Sarah, but if James and Robert could give advice on this as well. I grew up near the Mexican border in San Diego County, San Isidro, and my mother's from Tijuana, Mexico. So growing up visiting Tijuana and slum areas of Tijuana, navigation, when it came to navigation, my mother was my crutch. But she won't be around forever, So I would like some advice on approaches with navigation, given that sometimes you can't use your phone in these countries or don't have phone access. Do you work beforehand? I'd like to hear your thoughts on this.
Great, and then we'll just hear the last question.
Well, I mean,
I thought you could ask both questions.
Okay.
Let him ask.
Yeah.
Particularly when working with vulnerable populations, refugee areas, or families dealing with hardship and tragedy. I guess this doesn't apply so much anymore, but especially when you were starting out and trying to get published in the early days, did it feel like you'd sort of failed a certain ethical obligation to them when they invite you in, and then you aren't able to publish for editorial reasons or simply because of the way the industry side of things goes?
Before digital and the web, that was rarely an issue because no one would see it. But
it's a good idea to give pictures back, or send them, get emails, even if particularly if a story, or you need to contact somebody again for the story itself, but also send a photo back.
I mean, as a graduate student, like, I had that issue. I was doing my master's project and didn't really know where it was going to get published, if anywhere. I mean, you just have to be honest and tell them, I'm working on this story and I'm going to try to get it published here, or, I would be honest. I mean, you certainly don't want to tell them it's going to be published somewhere where you don't have it already lined up.
But people also like students. I find that, no. I
Really?
think there's a student, as a photographer, there's a student card. It is hard in New York because you can hardly find anyone who has not at some point in their life been interviewed by a Columbia journalism student. But I do think, I find the student card can be useful. Someone who would be annoyed by someone else, if you say, I'm a student, I'm trying to learn. I want to know I want to know more about what you do. I teach, and I find my students have great success with the student card.
The student card, that's a good one. I have to remember that. And then in terms of navigating, getting around.
In terms of navigating, I mean, you'd be shocked. There's like Wi-Fi at almost every gas station on the corner in Tijuana now. There's internet everywhere. And your phone, even, I mean, I got a U.S. signal half the time there.
Did you
But
trust in people to just follow them around, or did you
no,
map out things
no, I wouldn't do.
prior
Definitely
to-
do not do that. You can have your own map. You can have a printed map, and you can. If you're going to do a project there, I would find someone trusted to work with.
Partnering, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been amazing. Thank you.